Who's actually going to get the most out of a dedicated center channel paired with a pair of bookshelf speakers like these, and who should just stick with a single soundbar or a cheaper 2.1 system? If you're wondering whether the Polk Reserve R400 and R200 combo is worth the price tag for a typical living room setup, you're not alone. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've spent the last few weeks listening to a variety of movies, games, and music in a mid-size room, swapping a few different configurations, and I'm ready to break down what I found. Let's start with the situation most of us face: a TV about 55 inches wide, a couple of armchairs, a coffee table, and the desire for that cinema-like dialogue clarity without blowing the budget. The Polk Reserve series is marketed as a high-end offering, but the price lands it somewhere between a premium soundbar and a full-blown home theater stack. The first question is whether the extra hardware actually translates into a noticeable upgrade in everyday use. In my testing, the R400 center channel really shines when you're watching dialogue-heavy shows. Think political dramas, sitcoms with rapid back-and-forth banter, or any film where you want every word to sit up front without drowning in the rest of the mix. The speaker's placement directly below the TV, angled toward the listening spot, creates a focused sweet spot that makes it easier to follow conversations even at lower volumes. If you usually crank the TV up because you can't hear the actors, this can be a game changer. However, that focus can become a downside in a larger room or an open-plan space where the sound needs to spill into multiple listening zones. In those cases, the center can feel a bit pinned to the front, leaving side listeners with a weaker sense of what's happening. The R200 bookshelf speakers are the other half of the equation. I positioned them on stands, slightly forward of the TV, with a modest tone angle. For music, they delivered a surprisingly warm mid-range. Vocals and acoustic guitars were rich without being overly bright. In movies, the left-right imaging was solid enough that you could pinpoint on-screen action, which is something many entry-level speakers miss. If you have a small to medium room, under 300 square feet, and you're okay with a defined stereo field rather than a full surround immersion, these bookshelves do a respectable job. Now, who should skip this combo? If you live in a tiny apartment where the TV is the only focal point and you rarely host guests, the extra speaker real estate might feel unnecessary. A good quality soundbar with a built-in center driver can cover most of the same ground, and it avoids the cable routing and placement headaches that come with separate components. Likewise, if you're an audiophile who already owns high-end floor-standing speakers and a dedicated subwoofer, you'll probably find the Reserve R200's performance competent but not revolutionary. The R400, while clear, doesn't have the sheer authority of a larger, more expensive center driver that sits on a dedicated cabinet. One practical strength of the Polk Reserve pair is how forgiving they are when you're not a perfect installer. The R400's mounting plate includes a simple swivel that lets you angle the driver without needing a custom bracket, and the R200's rear ports are designed to work reasonably well even when the speaker is a few inches away from the wall. In my apartment, the rear wall is only about 4 inches behind the bookshelf speakers, and the bass response stayed tight rather than boomy. That's a hidden benefit. Many users assume they need a massive cabinet or far-field placement to get decent low frequencies, but the Reserve's internal tuning handles moderate proximity decently. On the flip side, there are a couple of practical weaknesses you'll hit early. First, the R400's size and weight make it a bit of a hassle to mount on a low TV stand. If you've got a sleek modern console with limited clearance, you'll need to either raise the TV or find a separate shelf, which adds to the overall cost and effort. Second, the R200's finish, while looking elegant in a brushed wood veneer, can show fingerprints and dust more readily than matte finishes. I found myself wiping them down more often than I'd like, especially if you have pets that like to perch nearby. Another trade-off worth mentioning is the requirement for a decent AV receiver that can handle a dedicated center channel and 2 front speakers without forcing you into a low-power mode. The Polk Reserve series is designed for a receiver that can output at least 100 watts per channel into an 8-ohm load to truly unleash its dynamic range. If you're still using a dated entry-level receiver, you might not notice the full benefit, and the speakers could sound flat or underdriven. In that scenario, you'd be better off upgrading the amp first, or choosing a set that's paired with a more modest power requirement. When it comes to value, the price point sits at roughly the upper end of the Gudinoformist people tier.